We've had a really rich day of dialogue here in the Open Space Learning Day at the Capacity Building Hub, and we're now moving into the final session. And here we're looking at capacity building tools for implementing the Paris Agreement. And we've got just a wonderful panel, all representing different mandated bodies. So we have the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, we've got the Adaptation Committee, and we've got the Least Developed Countries Expert Group, each sharing different resources and looking to you for feedback on them. Now, the way we're going to do this will be different from other COP events that you might have attended, in that this will not be talking heads and then a few questions. We're not doing that. Within open space, it's a process that actually got created when somebody noticed that the most interesting parts of conferences is what happens at the coffee break. And so then someone designed a whole process based on that principle. So in pure open space, we would not even have speakers here. We would only be saying what topics are of interest to you to discuss on that really important question of tools and applications for implementing the Paris Agreement. But the Paris Committee, but the Secretariat has done very careful work, and there was such interest in presenting at this day that they have done the hard work of choosing just a few projects and ideas to have formally presented, but only short. These presentations will be less than 10 minutes. And then we're going to ask, are there any other topics that you would like to discuss related to our theme of tools and applications for implementing the Paris Agreement? So please think about that as you listen to these presentations, which are more teasers or pitches for the session that they are going to present. And then those sessions will be in parallel at the same time in different corners of the room. And they won't feel like a session, they're going to feel like a conversation, because they're going to they all have questions that they are eager to get a multitude of responses to. So, without further ado, I'm going to pass the microphone over to Alejandro from the Secretariat, who's going to set a context for today, and then for this last section of today, and then invite the presenters to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine, and it's a pleasure to be here with you and have our distinguished colleagues from the AC, the LEG, and the Paris Committee on Capacity Building. Yes, as Christine mentioned, the title of this session is Capacity Building Tools and Applications for Implementing the Paris Agreement. The Paris Committee on Capacity Building, one of its key mandates is to identify and how to best address capacity needs and gaps for implementing the Convention and the Paris Agreement. And in order to fulfill this mandate, the Paris Committee on Capacity Building works very closely with other constituted bodies, including through this an informal coordination group that was recently established, where the participation of all the constituted bodies. And as Christine mentioned, in this session, we wanted to highlight relevant tools and applications being worked on by the Adaptation Committee and the LEG as an input for the discussions, and of course the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, to give you a flavor of what these bodies are doing, and also, as mentioned by Christine, get some feedback on how to better apply these tools. Once you have a tool, then how to best apply it, and also how to be able to collect more tools, more applications, which could be of use by different range of users. And I think the constituted bodies present here have done a lot of work on tools and applications, and they would greatly benefit from input from the audience. So we have 3 short presentations, starting with the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, and then followed by the AC and LEG, and then we'll move to the stations as described by Christine. And I see we have 3 spaces already. Structure along the 3 constituted bodies or topics. So you have capacity building on one side, then you have, for example, what the LEG has been doing on training for aligning the Paris Agreement, and then the work of the Adaptation Committee. So very much looking forward to your engagement in these different works. So without further ado, I would like now then to start the presentations from the bodies, and I will start with the Paris Committee on Capacity Building with Mrs. Roberta Ayana, which was one of the co-chairs of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building. So Roberta, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Roberta Jan, as Alejandro said, from Italy, and one of the co-chair of the PCCB. I assume by now everyone is quite familiar to the Paris Committee on Capacity Building. It was established in 2015 with the mandate, as Alejandro already said, of addressing gaps and needs for implementing the Paris Agreement in terms of capacity building. And of course, capacity building tools and applications for implementing the Paris Agreement are a key element to our work and our mandate. COP25 and CMA2 requested the PCCB to continue its effort to gather and promote the development and dissemination of tools and methodologies for implementing capacity building activities under our second work plan from 2021 to 2024. So in response to this mandate, in the second half of 2021, we issued a call for submissions from parties and non-party stakeholders on existing tools and methodologies for implementing capacity building activities that enable countries to achieve long-term goals of the Paris Agreement. And we received 18 very good submissions from different stakeholders, which we synthesized in the first half of 2022, and we published the report on the website in June 2022. So you can find the link to the submissions we received and to the synthesis reports in the screen. And we also would like to point out that we disseminated relevant tools and resources that were shared through the submissions on the capacity building portal, and on the capacity building portal you will hear more later on by Alejandro. Let me just introduce briefly what kind of information and findings were compiled in the synthesis report. It contains information on characteristics of good tools and methodologies that enable countries to achieve long-term goals of the Paris Agreement. And this includes, for instance, training tools taking into account regional and contextual elements of those being trained or customizable, and tailor-made self-paced online training tools. It was noticed as a key characteristic the easy to understand language used with these tools. Then you can also find in the report information on components of tools and methodologies for capacity building that have proven to be the most effective. And here, for example, participatory tools were highlighted as being the most effective ones, as well as, for example, integrated partnership with local communities or networking components more broadly. Third, the synthesis reports contain information on tools and methodologies to support the efficient design, implementation, and monitoring evaluation of meaningful capacity building intervention that are found to be lacking. Tools that were noted as being lacking, among others, include tools that measure long-term impact of capacity building interventions and tools for climate data collection and analysis. Finally, you can find information in the report on thematic areas of the Paris Agreement where new tools and methodologies are needed the most. And on this, the submissions, for example, mention different areas ranging from addressing gender responsiveness to GHG emissions to tools providing guidance for NDC trackings. And this is just to name a few of them. So we really invite you to explore further the report and download it from our website. On the next slide here, I also would like to introduce you to one of our latest technical outputs in the context of implementing the Paris Agreement, which is our PCCB toolkit to assess capacity gaps and needs to implement the Paris Agreement. The PCCB developed this toolkit to support the effort of countries to identify and address their capacity needs and gaps to meet the challenges of climate change. It was launched officially with a webinar earlier this year in March, and you can as well access the toolkit and its accompanying resources via the QR code that you can see here in the slide. The next slide provides, you can see in the slide, the toolkit provides an overview of a capacity assessment cycle as well as complementary resources including case studies, tool, best practices and lessons learned. It aims to help the assessment process that enable countries to identify appropriate steps they can take to strengthen their national capacities and ultimately successfully implement their NDCs under the Paris Agreement. The toolkit is meant to serve as a resource for developing countries and for officials and their implementing partners in the assessment of relevant capacity needs and in the determination of gaps to implement the Paris Agreement objectives. And among others, it draws from the work of the UNDP, the GEF, the GCF, UCN, FAO, and other international and development cooperation organizations who are focused on supporting developing countries in the implementation of the Rio Conventions. The toolkit also includes examples of qualitative and qualitative tools to assist with capacity assessment, and specific case studies are included to demonstrate concrete links to the various assessment process that have been developed as part of the support provided by the constituted bodies of the UNFCCC, international development institutions, and other implementing organizations. And it also links to additional resources that may be accessed via the UNFCCC capacity building portal and other online resources to inspire countries to further work on capacity building. The next slide, the toolkit recommends a capacity assessment cycle across 5 stages, including inception, assessment, analysis, development and implementation, and monitoring and evaluation, and then outlines key steps under each of the 5 stages. Directly linked to the 5 stages of the capacity assessment cycle, the toolkit presents a total of 8 case studies from the countries shown on these slides that showcase initiatives to undergo capacity assessment relating to climate change. And I warmly invite you to explore and use this toolkit and help us to promote it further among interested stakeholders and practitioners in your network. We also are in the process currently of translating the toolkit in different UN languages with the great support of some of our key stakeholders and the PCCB network members. And those versions translated will be published in due course on the website. Now I would like to hand over to Alejandro Kilpatrick from the Capacity Building Subdivision at the UNFCCC Secretariat to quickly introduce the Capacity Building Portal, which is another great tool to support capacity building under the Paris Agreement, and which the PCCB is using extensively to share capacity building resources we came across in our work. Please, Alejandro.
Thank you very much, Roberta, and we wanted to include this presentation on the Capacity Building Portal because it's very relevant to the discussions here. We want to gather resources on best practices, case studies, lessons learned, etc. on capacity building, and the Capacity Building Portal is a platform, it's a tool that precisely does that, gathers and presents information on projects, tools, courses, and other resources that enhance or seek to enhance the capacity of developing countries. It is basically an interface that enables searching and filtering by topic and type of resource. For example, we have topics on adaptation, mitigation, loss and damage, climate finance, and resources, which could be e-courses, podcasts, projects, etc. As of today, we have a number of over 350 resources organized in 11 topics and includes resources from both party and non-party stakeholders. For example, Roberta mentioned the PCCB toolkit. The toolkit itself is a document, but it has a web page that is connected to the Capacity Building Portal, and in that web page we include all resources relevant to assessing capacity buildings and gaps to maximize the impact of the resources made available through the toolkit. Here just a quick graph on the resource breakdown by theme, the 11 themes we have, and you can see a bit adaptation has the greatest number of resources, which is quite encouraging, and then on climate action as well. In terms of breakdown by types of resources, the greatest type is tools, precisely the topic we're discussing here. So there is a great interest of presenting tools and in sharing tools. So we go to the next slide. Please, just a quick reminder where you could have the Capacity Building Portal, and we're always looking for additional resources, and it's something that it would be interesting to discuss in the breakout groups, how to mine these resources, how to identify resources, tools, applications, and we're happy to collaborate and make sure those can be made available also in the Capacity Building Portal. So this is the end of the presentation on the Paris Committee on Capacity Building and other tools. So I now have the pleasure of inviting Alice Gaustad. Sorry if I hope I pronounced properly. No. Apologies, from the Adaptation Committee. I'm very much looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. That was perfect. So I'm Alice. I work for the Norwegian Environment Agency, usually. And I'm also fortunate to be a member of the Adaptation Committee. I do have an outdoor voice, so I'm kind of worried about being too close. Sorry. Okay? Thank you. So the Adaptation Committee is very, very pleased to be part of this year's Capacity Building Hub. And we are looking forward to present two of our very, very recent products that hopefully will contribute to building the capacity in countries, especially to plan and implement adaptation, as well as to communicate adaptation needs and actions. So the first product I'm going to present to you is the publication which is named, this is a mouthful, Navigating the Landscape of Support for the Process to Formulate and Implement National Adaptation Plans. We just call it Navigating the Landscape for Support of NAPs. And the second one is a draft supplementary guidance for use, voluntary use by parties in communicating adaptation information. So let's start on the support for the NAPs. Slide 2, yes. This product was developed to assist adaptation practitioners and all other interested stakeholders in navigating the vast landscape there is of support that is available for adaptation, and particularly to formulate and implement national adaptation plans. So the product consists of a PDF file you can access, which is very good for the 50 plus, actually the 60 plus, so we can get it like this. This makes me happy. But there is also an online publication which actually is easier to navigate in, and it's always also very handy because it's a lot easier to update, and there's where you come in and you can provide wishes for what you want us to update it with. This navigating landscape for support for NAPs contain information on the available support in the following 6 categories that we can see on the screen. There are guidelines, there are information about systematic observation, science and climate services, information and knowledge, finance, capacity building and technical support, and support for technology development and technology transfer. So the next slide. So actually both the products, the PDF and the online tool, answers questions like what kind of support is available within these categories, both under the UNFCCC, but not only under the UNFCCC, but also beyond, and which organizations and programs and arrangements provide for this support, and how can it be accessed and by whom. So this slide 4. Next slide, please. Okay. Oh, it's not so easy to read. When you've read it, you will be expert in acronyms as well. So on this slide, you see the different categories of support and which organization and support arrangements are described under each of them. So in the inner circle, you see all those bodies and arrangements that provide support within the UNFCCC, while the outer circles, you find those organizations and arrangements that provide support for NAPs beyond the UNFCCC process. So this diagram is also the gateway to the online portal, where you can hover over any of these entries and you will see a pop-up with a short description of the respective provider and of the support and a link for further information. So as mentioned, the Adaptation Committee plans to update this online tool regularly, and you are very much invited to have a look and provide feedbacks back to the Adaptation Committee so that we can continuously develop this tool so that it will be useful for you. So turning to the second product, which is the draft supplementary guidance for Adaptation Committee. Take a step back. In the Paris Agreement, there is a paragraph that says that each party should, as appropriate, submit and update periodically an adaptation communication. Which